The following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth, and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
So it's Thursday afternoon, and we're going to be talking about money. Now, if you're listening to the program the week of May 18th, you're hearing a program that we recorded a week earlier. I'm at a conference. If you're listening to this on May 18th, I'm at a conference on investments. But I will be back the following week. And if you're listening to it the week of May 11th, we're coming to you live, at least on Thursday. And Friday, you're hearing what we said on Thursday. Anyway, the news of the week is the firing of Comey. Maybe the White House, what they say is correct. Maybe it's not correct. There's a lot of questions. The question for us is not how it was done, but what the impact will be on the investments and the market. We're going to talk about that later in the program. Ben Bernanke this past week said the Trump target of 3% on GDP is a very long shot. I agree with that, but I don't think that that's necessarily bad, and I'm going to talk about that later in the program. I have a very interesting guest today who's going to give you insight into what's going on the banking industry. That's coming later today. You want to hear what he has to say. But I want to start. I got my MBA. It was called an MSIA, Master of Science of Industrial Administration, at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Now, Pittsburgh's located at the confluence of two rivers that come together and form a third. The Monongahela and the Allegheny come together, and the river that comes out of that is the Ohio. That's the Three Rivers Stadium. The city center of Pittsburgh, the old city, is right there where those three rivers come together. Now, in the city of Pittsburgh, if you go across the river and on the south side, you can go up what they call Mount Washington. It's kind of like Somerset in Bellevue. It's about that same height. But they have a tram that goes up there. And I was young and single, and it used to be fun to take a date and go up the tram, and there's a restaurant at the top, have a drink or a meal or whatever, and look back into the city. And in those days was before the big push on pollution. And you look down, and alongside the Allegheny River was J&L Steel. And from those smokestacks, one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen is the smokestacks from those blast furnaces blowing pillars of flames into the air, maybe 50 to 100 feet. I don't know how large. And the older I get, the larger the flames get, I think. But it was a beautiful sight. Steel coming out of Pittsburgh. You know, that was an epic that's gone by the wayside. Steel started at the epic of tycoons, Rockefeller and Morgan and Carnegie and Vanderbilt. In 1874, the United States was an agricultural country. Over 50% of the people were employed in agriculture on the farms. They'd come through the first Great Depression of 1837, and in 1837, the Bank of England and the Bank of France acted like our Federal Reserve did in 2008 and pushed money into the system. They bought government bonds, they bought state bonds, they put money into the economy of the U.S. at that time and got us through that first Great Depression. In 1874, we again went into a panic, into a depression, but this time no one did anything. Not foreign banks, not our own bank. The reasoning and the logic was almost the same as we heard in 2008. Those people that did not want to see the Federal Reserve rescued, didn't want to see businesses rescued, didn't want to see General Motors rescued, didn't want to see all those things happen. The arguments were essentially the same in 1874 as they were in 2008. And what happened is there was no stimulus. The arguments were the same, but no stimulus for almost 30 years. And every other year was a recessionary year. Every other year was like 2008. You can imagine what it was. And even the little bit of recovery that happened in between was not very solid. They didn't keep track of unemployment in those days, but if you go back and look, it probably reached 20% during 30 years. You can imagine, we experienced just a couple years like that. But imagine what it was like to have 30 years like that. You know, prior to that time, prior to 1874, 75% of the millionaires lived along the Mississippi River in the 1870s. They were the cotton farmers, the plantation owners. But as the 1870s gave way, it gave way to a birth of industrialization. And what happened in the 1870s through the early 1900s was that the United States became an industrialized nation. In fact, the United States drove world GDP to higher levels than it had been before. That was the industrialization. Steel production in 1875 was just 380,000 tons. By 1920, 60 million tons. Think about that. In 40 years, steel production rose from 380,000 tons to 60 million. By 1900, the U.S. was the largest producer and the lowest producer of steel. We were supplying not just the U.S., but a lot of the world. Between 1890 and 1900, output of steel tripled. And that continued through World War II to the 1970s. The U.S. dominated the world steel market. Think about it. Think of the stocks that were on the Dow in that period of time after World War II. U.S. Steel, Bethlehem Steel, Allegheny Steel, Inland, J&L. Go down the list, you had all these huge steel companies. But something happened. The steel companies were doing very well. They were wealthy, but they weren't making very many improvements. Foreign companies, on the other hand, foreign countries began to rebuild their steel mills, and they began to build it with better technology. I started my career in the aluminum industry, and I can remember the process that we went through. Normally, when you're producing aluminum, you're taking alumina, a powder, you're putting it into a cryolite bath at 1757 degrees Fahrenheit, passing an electrical current through it, and breaking apart the aluminum and the oxygen to form aluminum, which you then tap out through a ladle. You pull that out of the furnace, put it into a big ladle, carry that ladle to furnaces in the cast house, put it into casting furnaces, and from those casting furnaces, you pour that aluminum into these big molds, these molds that were maybe 8 feet wide, 4 feet high, and 20 or 30 feet long. Those were the aluminum ingots that were formed from the cast house. That ingot then was taken from the cast house, loaded onto rail cars, and shipped off as far away as Lancaster, Pennsylvania, into rolling mills, into steel, into casting facilities, or to Vancouver, Washington. There were a number of places where those ingots were shipped. But think about the process. That molten aluminum was put into the casting furnace and mixed with other alloys, cast into an ingot, cooled down until it became a solid metal, then was shipped across the country or shipped somewhere, had to be remelted in another furnace, and then cast. What happened when I was in the industry is a new type of technology came along where instead of casting into those big ingots, they began to do wire. So that the aluminum went into the cast house furnaces, and out, instead of the ingots, we were rolling wire out of those. We'd save a big step, and we saved a lot of money doing that. That's what was also happening in the steel mills. not most of the U.S. mills, but in the foreign mills. They were building small furnaces, and they were doing casting directly into product. They were innovating. They were disrupting the technology. By the 1980s, the U.S. was no longer competitive in the steel markets. And so what did the steel companies do? Instead of innovating, they went to Washington and asked for tariffs to be put on foreign steel. That was the end of our dominance in the steel market. Yes, we kept steel out for a while, but eventually the other companies, other countries caught up to us. We're going through a similar type of thing when we look at some of the big companies today. We're looking at not steel, not oil, but we're looking at data. And we're looking at companies that are beginning to dominate the world with control of their data. We're coming up to a commercial break. Don't go away, because I want to talk about this because it does have an impact. Steel lasted for a long time. Today, turnover in technology is much faster, much faster. The blue chip companies of yesterday are the black and blue chips of today. The blue chips of today will be the black and blue chips of tomorrow. Don't go away. We'll be right back after the commercial break.
About Money with Mike Adams will resume in a moment on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Did you know the 20-year annualized S&P return was 8.19%, while the 20-year annualized return for the average equity mutual fund investor was just 4.67%? That's a gap of 3.52%. It doesn't sound like much now, but it could mean the difference between retiring in comfort and running out of money. For some seniors, a gap that large could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and cut their retirement short. Don't run out of money. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today, 206-903-1019, and learn more about how you can, 1, create wealth for retirement, and 2, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
We're back with more About Money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So I started talking about the steel industry, and from 1900 until the 1970s, the United States steelmakers dominated world steel production. But instead of innovating, instead of moving into new technologies, instead of moving that way to be more competitive, instead of doing that, they continued to make very small improvements, allowing other countries to build their steel mills that were more efficient, more effective, that could actually transport steel to the U.S. and sell it cheaper than we could produce it. That was disruptive technology coming in, and that's an old industry. Disruption is the new buzzword today. And what we saw then was 70 years of domination. Things are happening much faster. McKinsey & Company did a report showing that the leadership companies in an industry are changing 3 times faster today than they did 30 years ago. That means instead of 70 years, companies may dominate for 10 or 15 years, but then they're going to be superseded by somebody. Today, as we look at what's going on, it's not steel, it's not oil, it's data, which is the big resource. If you look, it's Facebook and Google, Alphabet it's called, Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, Apple. Those are the blue chips today, and they dominate because of data. They're able to take that data and determine a lot about what you like and what you buy, and tailor sales programs to you You know, they just reported the earnings for Macy's and Kohl's. Retail sales are down at those places, while Amazon's are taking away market share. Online sales are increasing, even though the big stores, the department stores, are decreasing. I happened to be in Macy's maybe a month ago and walking through the store, and I think there were more sales clerks than there were customers in the store. And it was a Saturday afternoon. Retail has changed. So many people are now buying things on the internet. It's taken away from the department store. The department stores where they built these huge stores to have all sorts of product. So you could do almost a one-stop shopping, if you could call it that, at the department store. Now you don't have to do that. You can sit down at your computer, and in one chair, you can do your one-stop shopping. It's made a significant difference, and that's going to continue. The social media, the control of computers, and what's going on there, that's control of data. You know, the story about Target, for example, analyzed their own customers, and they found that when women were pregnant, what they did is they would buy special products, special soaps, unscented soap, toothpaste, and so on. And so they would send out advertisements based on their customers' purchases. And they actually sent it to a young woman who was 15 or 16, who had not told her parents that she was pregnant. And that caused a big uproar. Now Target still sends out advertisements, but they include lawnmowers and some of the other things. But that's control of data. That's big data. They're analyzing what you buy, where you buy, how you buy. If you go on some of the online stores, they will make recommendations. They're basing that on the data. Who controls that data is crucial, and it's valuable to those companies. Those are the blue chips of today. But we know, if you look at historical perspective, the blue chips of one day turn out to be the black and blue chips of the other day. If you look at the Dow in 1966 included American Sugar, included Tennessee Coal, included the U.S. leather. Actually, that's a little older than 1966. But if you look at 66, it included Westinghouse, it included Woolworths, it included U.S. Steel, it included Anaconda Copper. Those things change. And if you look at the companies that are on the Dow today, many of those companies did not exist in 1966. McDonald's is on the Dow. It came public in 1966. The world is changing, and investment styles have to change to adapt to that. The National Academy of Sciences has said that 85% of global economic growth in the next 20 years will come from new technology and innovations. Labor productivity improvements, discoveries of natural resources, rising education, and capital growth will contribute just 15%. It's technology that's going to make the difference. And if you're not ahead of the curve, you can't expect to have significant results. That's the story of U.S. Steel. That's the story of many of the large industries which have gone goodbye. It's the story of Eastman Kodak. It's the story of companies which did not make the innovations. Anyway, that wraps up that segment. I want to introduce my guest today. Mike Anderson, the CEO of Plaza Bank, is here. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
So why don't we start with your background?
Absolutely. I started in banking in 1978 with a savings bank that was located in Bremerton, or headquartered in Bremerton anyway. So I worked my whole career here in the Puget Sound area. Mm-hmm. And so I received some management training at that time, moved out to my first branch in Mercer Island, and at about the time that prime rates hit 21%. I don't know if you recall that or not.
I recall that time.
So that was an education. And
I recall trying to buy a house at that time.
Right.
And a 13% mortgage.
And we were trying to figure out how to finance those houses for you. So I was with that bank for about 15 years and ended up as a loan operations manager in charge of all our production for branches across the state. And then we were sold to Washington Mutual, who was in the process of acquiring banks around that time. And then that was followed by about a 9-year stint on the other side of the desk, if you will, working for the CFO of a manufacturing company here in South King County.
And I would guess that gave you a real insight into what goes on in the business itself.
Absolutely. I think it helps me to relate and work with the companies that I work with today in helping them with their banking needs. So then after that, though, I got back into banking in early 2000s and worked with a community bank, charter bank at the time, which went through some mergers and acquisitions, and then eventually joined Plaza Bank in December of 2014 as their chief lending officer. In November of last year, I was named the CEO of Plaza Bank.
So tell us about Plaza Bank. Tell us about the beginning, how it's evolved over this period of time going through the Great Recession.
Sure. Well, Plaza was formed in 2006, just before the Great Recession. So not the best time, but two primary gentlemen by the name of Mike Sotelo and Chris Guillen formed the bank with the idea of serving the local Hispanic community here in Seattle and all of King County, business owners and individuals alike. And then the recession hit, and that kind of changed the direction of the bank, if you will, for a while. They were very successful in raising capital and getting the bank started. And then after the recession, we kind of moved our focus to the business community as a whole. So we're a single office bank located in downtown Seattle that serves local businesses, closely held businesses, professional firms, nonprofits, and then their principals or their executives. And so all types of lending, from lines of credit to term loans, equipment loans, acquisition loans, SBA loans, all of that, and then of course the treasury management and savings products.
So you've seen significant change. When you started back in the day, people used to have tellers, and if you wanted to make a deposit, you went into the bank to make a deposit. If you wanted to make a withdrawal, you went to the bank. If you wanted to do a loan, that's changed significantly.
Well, you talked about technology earlier, and it's technology that allows us to operate out of a single office on the 27th floor of a downtown Seattle office building. So that technology includes online banking, what we call remote deposit capture, where customers can deposit their checks directly from their office rather than leaving the office to go to the closest branch. And then all sorts of electronic transfer forms like wires and ACH and those kinds of things. We find that we don't need to be on the street with multiple branches to serve our customers.
And we changed banks a couple of years ago, and I have been in that bank once. Otherwise, everything is done remotely.
Right. So we and that's how we tend to operate electronically. But we're small enough too where our customers can contact us. Everybody knows who they are, who that customer is. Help them as efficiently as we can, and take it from there.
So when you say customers contact you, how do you go about that process?
Well, it's either email or it's phone. If they feel it's a serious problem, then it's a phone call, and then contact any one of us at the office, and then we, direct it to the appropriate person to solve the problem.
So we're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away, because Mike has a lot more to say about banking and give you some insights into the changes that have gone on in banks and will continue to go on. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the break.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
So I'm here with Mike Anderson, the CEO of Plaza Bank. Before we get to talking about client services, let's talk about the survival of the Great Recession. The bank I was with at one time was Regal Bank. They did not survive. They were acquired by another bank. A lot of banks didn't survive that whole time, but Plaza Bank actually survived. Formed in 2006, they survived the Great Recession. That's a pretty miraculous thing. Tell us about that.
It is. There aren't many of us left, I guess. As I mentioned before, the founders were, very successful in forming the bank and did an excellent job of raising capital, a significant amount of capital to form the bank and get started. So the bank was opened and started making a number of loans. We had to get that capital out in order to earn a return. And then a couple of years later, the economy tanks, and so some of those loans start deteriorating.
Yes.
All right. But fortunately, we had a lot of capital to use in that to protect us against those significant losses. We did take those. We focused hard on cleaning up the assets, if you will, and the loans and that. And then in the middle of 2014, we raised additional capital to give us some more support, and then put more focus on what we call relationship banking, full relationship banking, where our customers are here local, in the local Seattle, King County area, and we try to provide full service to them. So it's, we're talking about loans and deposit accounts, treasury management services, and all that, rather than transactional type business, which might be lending on a property in central Washington, for example, or southern Washington, or even down in Oregon, where you don't have a good, full relationship with that client, and not a real good handle on the quality of the asset itself or what might be happening in the local market. So we're staying focused with local companies, and I think that's taking us, out of the recession and allowed us to survive to this point.
And you're beginning to expand business now.
That's correct.
So what kind of customers? You mentioned briefly small businesses and professionals. Tell us about how you service those customers. Tell us about the customers you have.
Well, sure. So they're manufacturers, they're distributors, some contractors. We're doing some construction loans in the area. Those construction loans are for, again, local. They're in the city limits of Seattle, where the builder has some equity in the project and that kind of thing. So we try to be smart about that. A typical customer might be a manufacturer where the owner owns the building that he's operating out of. So we can finance the building itself. If that's the case. We finance equipment loans for that manufacturer. Might be say a machine shop who's a second or third tier subcontractor for Boeing, say, and we'll finance the grinders and mills and CNC machines for that customer, or perhaps provide a line of credit for them for their short-term working capital needs, and then provide the deposit services as well. So we'll take their payments in that they receive. A lot of times it's electronic now. Provide online banking services for them, what we call remote deposit capture services. So when their checks do come in, the accountant in the office can scan the check and it's deposited same day, so same day credit, and those types of things. So that's how we service. Then everything's visible to them on their online banking.
And receivables support or in inventories, you're talking about manufacturing?
Mm-hmm. So primarily receivables in a case like that. We'll do some lending on inventory as well, but it's mostly receivables and cash flow
and I would guess that you have a lot of insight to that because you were on the manufacturing side.
That's correct. That helps me a lot, and it helps. I think our customers are a little they're comfortable because they know that I understand where they're coming from, and I think so I try to convey that to them, and we move forward.
Because a lot of times in a manufacturing business, it's not constant X amount out the door every month. It's sometimes you have orders come in and sometimes orders don't come in, and you have the cash flow needs.
It doesn't always flow steady and even. There are, if it's a normal business, there are peaks and valleys, and we're there to help get them through the valleys until the funds roll in to pay that line down and that.
And I would guess that Plaza Bank has real insight into doing that.
We have a lot of experience. With a small bank like ours, we need folks that have a lot of banking experience because of our size. Unfortunately, I guess we can't train too many people. We have to have a lot of experience within our four walls so we can best serve our clients.
It's not like some of the big banks who take kids out of college and within a couple of years they're trying to analyze things, so they have MBAs and have all the theory from school, but none of the experience. The shoes on the ground.
I can't say that's 100% true. There's some young guys that are very, very talented, or young people that are very, very talented that that could help us. But by and large, we need a bank like ours needs people with experience.
And how about professional firms? You mentioned those as well.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, like engineering firms and attorneys, architects, and the like, CPA firms. So we've been involved in acquisition type loans. So say that a new partner is buying into the practice, so we'll do some of that financing. We'll or maybe a firm that we have is purchasing an entire firm. So we'll look at that. And then sometimes, depending on the type of practice and that, small line of credit may be required, or the purchase of a building, purchase of real estate. Not a whole lot of line of credit or working capital type financing for those types of firms. And then, of course, their treasury management services.
And so all that is a focus, and it works well. So tell people how they would contact Plaza Bank.
Well, they can check us out on our website at www.plazabankwa.com, or just give us a call at 206-436-7600, or come and visit us. We're at the 520 Pike Tower building, right downtown Seattle, 27th floor.
So tell us the phone number again.
It is 206-436-7600.
And the website is?
www.plazabankwa.com.
Great to have you on the program, and you're doing a great job at the bank.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So we've got a few minutes. I want to talk about the news of the week, and that's the firing of Comey. Maybe it is what the White House says, and maybe it isn't. It raises a lot of questions, and it can have an impact on the market. It can have an impact on your investments. You know, I was at a National Association of Pension Advisors conference a couple months ago, and there was a lobbyist, there were congressional political analysts, not White House people, but congressional people, and everyone was asking questions about the Department of Labor, tax reform, infrastructure. I was the one who had to ask the question, what happens if Trump would be impeached? It's no longer a remote possibility. It's important to know, even if the probability is small, even if you don't believe it could happen, what would happen in terms of investments? And the response was essentially when Clinton was impeached, everything in Washington ground to a halt. So what does that mean for investments? It means it's going to be important to be in the right place at the right time. The economy is going very strong, and impeachment is not going to change that. And maybe there's impeachment, maybe not, who knows? But it will have an impact on certain industries. I can remember living through Watergate, and yeah, there's a lot of similarities. It was 2 years into the Nixon presidency before it really got started. And once it started, it really began to accelerate. It was a trickle of news followed by a small stream, followed by a river, followed by a tsunami. You know, and what this firing did sounds a lot like Watergate. So what's the impact on the market? I did some research this week. What happens? The first impeachment that we saw, not saying that there will be, but the first impeachment we saw was Andrew Johnson in 1868. Johnson succeeded Lincoln after Lincoln was assassinated, and he fired his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. There was no Dow in 1874, but the market was up 10% 3 months before impeachment began, and it took a dip during the impeachment, and it was up 6% in the 2 months following. Now, that was special because there were only 3 days from that firing to begin the impeachment process. The Nixon impeachment lasted longer. We're coming to a commercial break. I'll pick this up right after we come back from commercial break to talk about the impact.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
How do you picture retirement? House on the beach, small farm in the country, traveling the world with your spouse. The one thing you don't picture is running out of money. Retirement dreams are shattered all too often by poor investment choices, sending many retirees back to work. If you think the job market is tough now, try entering it after you've retired. Don't run out of money. Start planning now. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today at 206-903-1019 and learn more about how you can create wealth for retirement and probably, most importantly, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
About Money continues. Remember the website adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm talking about the impact. Should there be an impeachment? On what that does for the markets. And I look back at the Andrew Johnson, I talked about that. The Nixon impeachment was one to look at because I remember that. It was started in a very curious way. There was a break-in in 1972, prior to the election. Woodward and Bernstein did a Washington Post article in June of 72 and said one of the burglars had an address book with Howard Hunt, and there was a check made out to Charles Colson, or signed by Charles Colson. I don't remember. It all began at that time. It seemed really strange, but not a big deal. In September of 72, Hunt and Liddy and the burglars were indicted over that. Didn't seem much. Nixon's reelected. And in January, the burglars and Hunt and Liddy pled guilty. Things seemed to roll along, and in April, it began to break apart when John Dean was cooperating and began to testify. That began in April when John Dean said that he met with the president. The president first denied that he knew who John Dean was, and then, oh yeah, he knew John Dean, and then John Dean said, I met with him over 30 times. That was to lead, by the end of that month, to Ehrlichman and Haldeman resigning. John Dean was fired. And by May, the Senate began the investigation. And you can see it was a slow path. It began to pick up momentum. In July, they found out that, or in June, John Dean testified to the Senate that there was a cover-up of the Watergate. By July, Butterfield testified that Nixon recorded his conversations on tapes. And by October, and between that time, a special prosecutor was named, Archibald Cox. And on October, as the prosecutor was moving along, Nixon fired him on a Saturday night, called the Saturday Night Massacre. People have been drawing parallels between the Comey firing and the Nixon firing. In November, just a month later, Nixon made his very famous speech saying, I am not a crook. I'm not a crook. By March of 74, Nixon was named an unindicted conspirator in the break-in. And on August the 8th, August 8th is my birthday, I remember the day, 1974, Richard Nixon resigned as president. It was an investigation that started kind of funny, but picked up speed, and it seemed like at the end, almost every day, things were happening. The massacre happened. So what was going on in the market? Because that's important. The market had been going down since 1972, since the beginning of 1972, prior to the time Nixon was elected. And if you remember, what was happening at that time is we had the inflation crisis. OPEC was curtailing oil production, and we saw oil prices skyrocket. We saw inflation take off, and as inflation hit, the market began to sink, and it continued to sink during that entire time of the Watergate scandal and the resignation of Nixon. Nixon resigned, and it was almost at that time that the market bottomed in 1974, and the correction was over and began to climb almost 50% from the bottom of that market. So we have the Johnson impeachment in 1868, where the market was up 10% 3 months prior to the impeachment. There was a dip during impeachment, and then up 6% after the impeachment. But not everything the same way. The same was true of the Nixon time. It was not the Nifty 50 that did the climb. It was other stocks besides that. In the Clinton impeachment, the market had bottomed in 1994. That was a correction. When the impeachment began, the market dipped. The impeachment began in 98. The market actually dipped 3%. And once the impeachment of Clinton was done, and it was a fairly short time, it was not the drawn-out thing that Nixon was. Once the impeachment was over in 98, the market started to climb, and you remember what happened. 98 and 99. 99, the market was up almost 40%, maybe 44%, after the impeachment was done. But there were winners and losers. And if you remember, the 98 was the time of the internet and technology. And it was those companies which really soared. Companies that were the run-of-the-mill, the tire companies, the car companies, the steel companies, those companies didn't do so well. It was anything that had a .com in the name that really soared. There were winners and losers. Right now, we're going through this whole process, and I believe that there's a significant chance that we're going to see an impeachment proceeding begin. It's not zero, it's not 100%, but it's not a small percent either. It's going to be important to be in the right place at the right time. So I want to finish on one thing. Bernanke stated that the GDP was not likely to grow as much as forecast by the Trump administration. I believe that. GDP doesn't tell the full story of what's going on in the economy. If you look, Einstein's insight in an Economist article said, no matter how or where or when or by whom measured, the speed of light in a vacuum is constant. That's not true of price. William Norhaus of Yale talks about GDP in terms of changes of prices of things that people buy. From 1800 to 1992, GDP grew 3 to 5 times. But if you measure candles, the price of candles to the price of tungsten light bulbs, that was the growth of that was 3 to 5 times in terms of price. But if you measure it by the number of lumen hours, the drop per lumen hour of light dropped 100-fold. GDP is a very complex thing. You're adding the value of a lot of things that are produced across a wide range of industries, and you're taking the net inputs and you're trying to assess the importance of those to the economy. There's a whole history of the GDP, but if you look at it, in the 1970s, people were buying cars and radios and refrigerators and washing machines and TVs and cameras and lawnmowers and telephones. Those things are changing. In the 1950s, you didn't have the term teenager. They came into existence. That term came into existence in the 1960s. You know, in 1950, 75% of the people in the U.S. had a washing machine, but almost no one in Europe did. Cars, only 75% of the population had a car in 1960. A car. Telephones, in the U.S., 94% of people had a telephone in 1970. In France, less than 50%. Those things factor in and change. It's not the same purchasing today as it was then. So GDP is not a really accurate measure of what goes on in the economy. We'll pick up more of this as time goes along. I will be back with you in the week of May 25th. Have a great time and take care. And maybe we're going to have springtime. That's it for today. Take care.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only. Any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again for more About Money with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The following program sponsored by Adams Financial